Approval has an expiry date for 2 years, and we're making an improvement to it so that if it's taking you longer to receive your IPv4, and if your needs hasn't changed, you'll be able to extend that pre-approval easily. For listing service, it's basically about listing the needs that's been approved on APNIC's website. So those who have access IPv4 will be able to contact you and discuss about IPv4 transfer. And you can see the approval list there from the APNIC website. So for supporting Whois data, we have on this journey since 2013, and this year we have a couple of focus and highlights. We've recently introduced organization object. It's a new object added into the Whois database. It really is an object contains the contact information just for your organization, the members' organization. The benefit here is APNIC members will be able to update their organization information such as address, contact phone number, information about a company easily from my APNIC, and that can be managed anytime. And we know there are other important contacts that need to be managed and maintained, such as your authorized person contact for your membership, and there will be contact associated with resource that delegated by APNIC, and we are making further improvement to this, and you will shortly hear the presentation from Wita for more details on this. Finally, the IR collaboration. We do work together with other RIRs from time to time on some project initiative, and this particular one is about identify internet health indicator, ITHI, as some may know. So this is a project initiated by ICANN. The goal of this project is to develop a matrix to measure the health of the internet unique identifier system. Because IRs involve managing the numbers, we've agreed to facilitate the development of these metrics for the number registry system. We started the collaboration work since late in 2016, and just recently the draft of the metrics or the outcome of the work, a collaboration's been published onto the NRO website, and it's ready for public consultation and comments. We also expect that after the consultation, we would collect the information and we'll be able to work further on the project and present the document in 2018. The scope for this is measuring about the internet number resources administered by each of the IRs or the resources that we managed, including the NRO, the statistic contained in the NRO stats. And we are excluding, so we are not measuring the special space that's reserved for technical community and special purpose or for future delegations. And these metrics and measurement works against 3 C's. It's about data accuracy defined as comprehensive, correct, and current. Comprehensive meaning that every records that should be there are included and counted, and there's no duplication. And current meaning the records there, you can use it to reach the contact. The current meaning the data there has just been confirmed, updated, or to be updated, or it's just recently been updated or confirmed to be updated. And as I mentioned, the information now is being published onto the NR website with a very good detailed document. So I'd like to invite you to visit the NRO website, and to participate, you need to subscribe to the mailing list. There's a lot of detailed information there. Just be aware of the deadline for comments. It's 12th of December. So that will conclude my update for this morning, and as always, we like to hear your feedback and comments to improve our services for you. And if you have any questions or need assistance from us, feel free to speak to every APNIC staff here or contact our help desk in the future out of this meeting. And that's for my talk, and I'm ready for questions, if there's any.
Hi, good morning. I'm Alain Durand from ICANN. I'm running the ITHI project at ICANN. First off, I would like to congratulate the IRs for getting together and working on this and starting this public comment period. And I think this is really, really important. I would like to encourage everybody to look at this and participate in the discussion. This is for the number side. For the name side, the project has actually moved quite along. Since last time we talked, it was in February in Vietnam. I have a presentation about this tomorrow in the policy discussion, at the end of the policy discussion. And if you're interested or anybody's interested to see where we are, what kind of metrics we are developing, I will encourage you also to come and participate to the session tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain, for sharing the information. So it's tomorrow afternoon for your presentation.
I think it's the morning.
Oh, tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions for me? If not, I'd like to invite the next speaker to come up. Anna?
Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Anna, I'm from APNIC, and this morning I am going to present about APNIC Whois upgrade. Okay, part of the Whois upgrades we've done recently is the recent implementation of the organization object, and also our plan to implement the last modified attribute, which we scheduled to do after APNIC44. Now, the purpose of this presentation is to make you aware about these changes in Whois database relating to organization object and last modified attribute, the timeline of the implementation, and what APNIC members need to know about these changes. Okay, so I'll start by explaining what an organization object is. As George explained earlier, this is a new Whois object type implemented in Whois that is used to represent an APNIC account holder's company name and contact information. An account holder's delegation from APNIC is like AS number or IP address is linked to their organization object, and this allows an organization's resources to be determined easily in Whois. For example, you can do an inverse query using an organization object to check all reference objects under your account. Now, how are we creating these organization objects? For all existing APNIC account holders, you can either confirm or update your organization details in My APNIC, and the organization object will be created for you. And for those new accounts, you will get the information about your organization object when you receive your IP address or AS number delegation from APNIC. Now, in terms of implementation, where we are now, let me give you a quick timeline from the time we announced the upgrade and where we are now. So on June 5, we announced about the upgrade by writing a blog post and also sharing this in the mailing list. Then on June 26, the upgrade has been installed. July 12, we've sent an email to authorized contacts of APNIC, introducing them to the organization object. And then August 9, we've started inserting the organization object for members who have either confirmed or update their organization details in My APNIC. And by end of August, we have a total of 3,000 organization objects created. So that's over 54% of total APNIC membership. So now our goal is to encourage the remaining members to update or confirm their organization details in My APNIC. So what actions we need from members to get their organization object created? Okay, so in this slide, I'm just showing you the emails that we've sent to authorized contacts of APNIC in July 12. basically introducing them to the organization object, giving the link on how to log into my APNIC, and also explaining the need to either confirm or update the organization details to get the organization object created. It's actually pretty straightforward. When you log into my APNIC, you will see this on the landing page, and there's a link there where you can either confirm that your organization details are correct, so it's right below there, or an option to edit if you need an update. So once this action is completed, then your organization object will be created. Now, for those members who hasn't registered to my APNIC yet, or if you haven't created your organization object, please feel free to ask our assistance. APNIC Help Desk is available in this conference. We have the lounge located in front of the registration area. And we also have an FAQ about organization object available in APNIC website if you need more information. So that's my update about the organization object. Now I am moving on to the last modified attribute. So what is last modified attribute? It is a new attribute replacing the existing changed attribute. It stores the time when the Whois object was last updated, and the value is set by the server when an update occurs in the Whois database. Now, why use the last modified attribute? Mainly for the purpose of accuracy of the date and time stamp when the changes are made for an individual record in the Whois database. Now, I mentioned earlier in my presentation that we plan to implement the last modified attribute after APNIC44. The implementation will be in two phases. During phase 1, when an object is updated and it contains changed attribute, the system will accept it, but the change field will be removed and it will be replaced by a last modified attribute. It will also contain a message that says that the last modified attribute will be deprecated. Now, for those objects that is deleted in the Whois database that contains the changed attribute, the system will ignore that and it will delete the record without having any errors. Now for phase 2, this is the time when the changed attribute will be totally deprecated and the Whois system will reject if an object is either updated or deleted that contains the change field. But this is going to be implemented when we see that there's very minimal impact or zero impact to the members. So that's it about my Whois upgrade presentation. Do you have any questions? Or we will entertain questions later.
Yeah, we can also do that. If there's no question now, we'll still have time for question later. Thank you, Anna. Next, I'd like to invite Vivek Nigam to come up and give his talk on geolocation update.
Okay, thank you, George, and good morning, everyone. My name is Vivek, and I manage the member services team. During last year's Apricot conference, we held an information session on IP geolocation. And in that session, I made a presentation outlining the different types of geolocation complaints that our members approach us with. We concluded that session by saying that we'll do some more work to get a better understanding of how APNIC data is consumed for geolocation purpose so that we can provide better support when members approach us with these problems. So in this presentation, I would like to share with you some information about the IP geolocation ecosystem. So this is our interpretation of how the whole geolocation works and what you can do if someone gets your location wrong. I'll also talk about what location information is currently available from APNIC, what are some of the limitations with them, and then some proposed solutions to address those limitations. Now, we are not experts in IP geolocation, so it will be good if we can get some feedback on what you think of these solutions. Okay, so I'll start with the ecosystem. So geolocation providers like MaxMind, IP Location, and others, they use various different sources of data for IP location. They do data mining, they look at routing data, and so on, and some of them also look at the registry data. We reached out to a couple of geolocation providers, and some of them mentioned they look at the FTP delegated stats file, but they generally give it very low preference, and some only look at it when there is no other source of information available. And once they have all this information, they apply their own proprietary analysis, and that's how they decide what the location for an IP address is. Okay, so content and service providers who are interested in IP location, they can source this information from any geolocation provider of their choice. Some of the larger content service providers have their own in-house geolocation system, so they may not be referencing any geolocation provider. And on the other hand, some smaller content and service providers, they may not want to pay for these services, so again, they may look at other sources, including APNIC data. Now, when end users, they receive incorrect content or poor service due to geolocation problems, we suggest that the end user first submit the corrections to the relevant content or service provider, because if they have their own in-house system, they should be able to fix it. But if that does not work, we suggest that they report it to their ISP, so the ISPs can check that if it's a problem with the geolocation provider data and submit their correction reports to the geolocation providers. Now, once the geolocation providers fix this information, it should filter down to the content providers, and then ultimately that should fix the end user's problems. So in theory, this should work, but in reality, it does not always work. So let me try and show you where some of the problems may lie. So when it comes to location information from APNIC, there are two different sets of information that we publish. There's APNIC data, so this is information that APNIC registers, and then there's member data, which is information members can choose to register. Every time APNIC delegates an IP, we register an INET-num or an INET6-num object, and the country attribute in that object is used to indicate the economy where the organization is registered. Likewise, we also put an entry in our stats file, the APNIC delegated stats file, with the information on what the IP address is and the economy where that member organization is registered. Now, when members want to indicate where they have deployed the network, they can register customer assignments and use the country or geoloc attributes in those customer assignments to indicate this is where the network is deployed. However, there are quite a few limitations with this member data or customer assignments. For example, the country attributes in the customer assignments can be used to indicate where the network is located, or it can also be used to indicate where the customer member organization is located. And there's no tool or mechanisms for members to indicate which one they're trying to imply here. In the event the member has a portable assignment, they cannot register customer assignments in the first place because you need to have a portable allocation. So in these cases, members can use the geoloc coordinate, but from our past experience, there are very few members who are using this, and we have not received any confirmation from members that using geoloc has fixed any geolocation problems. So probably there are not many people who look at this data. So this is an email we received a few weeks ago. So it highlights the typical problem with the portable assignments. So in this case, the member organization is located in India, and they have received a couple of portable assignments for their infrastructure. When they tried to use one of those assignments in their Philippines office, they started having geolocation problems, and they were being pointed to India. Now, because this member is legally registered in India, all the APNIC data points to India, and because they have received an assignment, they cannot register further custom assignments to indicate how they're using it. We are also seeing a lot of requests from members to update their APNIC data because it's causing geolocation problems. So on a weekly basis, we get a couple of requests from members for support on geolocation. Sometimes they identify the problems due to geolocation provider, and that fixes it. But at other times, they identify that it's the APNIC data that's causing the problem. And so every month, we get few requests to update the APNIC data, which could be the delegated stats file or the country attribute in the parent blocks. This is an example where we processed a transfer, and after completing the transfer, the member started reporting geolocation problems. So in this example, there was a member in Australia that got acquired by a New Zealand member. Once we processed the transfer, we updated all the registration to reflect the new New Zealand entity as the custodian. For a month or so, everything was fine, and then the member reported they're having geolocation problems. The member did advise that the physical network was the same in Australia. The customers were in Australia. It was just the ownership that had changed, but they were still getting, all the customers were getting pointed to New Zealand. So in this case, we provided the usual support, contact the geolocation providers, try and register custom assignments, but none of that made any difference. So at the end, when we exhausted all other options, we reversed the APNIC data back to Australia, and that seems to have fixed the problem. Okay, so now that you have some understanding of the problems and limitations, I'll talk a bit about some potential solutions. So as Anna explained, we have recently implemented a new Whois object known as organization object. We could take some leverage of this object and use this to indicate where the member organization is located. And if we do that, we can free up or relax the country attribute in the INET num and INET 6 nums, so members can freely use that to indicate where they have deployed their networks. And to further reduce ambiguity or improve the visibility of this new information, we can provide some tools in MyAPNIC. So when members change the country attributes, they can also specify this is the location where our network is deployed. And if they do that, we can publish some stats like the delegation stats to show that information that the member has provided. Now, lastly, if we do these changes, some of the benefits are, of course, that it might fix some geolocation problems, but it will also improve clarity. So with these changes in place, we can tell everyone, if you're interested in the member's location, refer to the org object. If you're interested in where the network is deployed, you can refer to this new stats file. If there's no entry there, it indicates the member has not given this information, and you may want to reconsider using APNIC data for geolocation. Some concerns with these changes include the member data is not validated, so some members could intentionally put wrong data, and APNIC cannot validate and say this is true or not. And due to those limitations, we are not sure if all geolocation providers and consumers will look at this data. But unless we try it, we're never going to know. So that's the end of my presentation. Happy for questions or feedback on what you think of these changes, or maybe other potential solutions to this problem.
Any question for Vivek? Paul?
Good morning, everyone. Paul from APNIC. Thanks, Vivek. I hope that's interesting to everyone here, and that the problem is understood well by everyone in the room. That that APNIC is trying to help our members to have their resource properly identified by geolocation providers. Where, in spite of the fact we're actually offering geolocation providers the opportunity to improve their data, because we are told, APNIC is told very accurately and authoritatively by the holder of the resource themselves when there's a problem. So we actually can pass that information on to geolocation providers, and they can, by receiving that information, they can improve their service. And yet, in spite of that, we have had a hard time reaching geolocation providers. I think they naturally make themselves hard to reach because they don't want to receive a whole lot of spurious requests from people wanting to arbitrarily hop around the world to change their location. But in the case of the data that APNIC can provide, I mean, all it is an offer to improve the service that the geolocation provider is giving. So if anyone in the room can help us to get easier, more accurate, less burdensome access into the geolocation providers, then it really is in the benefit of those providers and of our members who, as Vivek explained, are often being geolocated in the wrong places. So it is it's something that we're getting a lot of inquiries about, a lot of queries about at APNIC, particularly with the increase in transfers. So transfers of address blocks are going from one economy to another much more frequently these days. So we're much more frequently hearing from ISPs that have taken a transfer that the address block that they've received is still geolocated elsewhere in its previous location. So it's going to increase, and it really would be nice if we could find a better way, a better channel to simply tell the service providers and, as I say, improve their services as well as our members' experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. So, as Paul suggested, if any one of you knows anyone or anyone who happen to watch this live cast later on, we would like to reach out, or please get in touch with us. We'd like to work together with you so that we can better support our members, and also at the same time, if you are a geolocation provider, would help to improve your data accuracy. Any more questions, comments? Okay, good. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you. So next, I'd like to invite Wita to come up to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wita. I'm working at the registration services, doing the IP address, internet resource allocation to the members. So today, I'm going to provide a quick update about the new contact update feature project that will be implemented in my APNIC portal. We will cover the following points and to give you some ideas about the background while we are doing this project, which is part of the ongoing initiative of APNIC to improve the Whois data quality. And we will also share the information about the benefit and the project plan. As some of you may have already aware, there are two types of contacts in APNIC database. The member account contacts are the one who registered for the membership account, and it is only visible in APNIC internal database and my APNIC. The second type of contacts is a Whois contacts, which are associated with the internet resource delegated by APNIC to their organization and visible publicly in APNIC Whois database. This is an example or screenshot from my APNIC page where the member can manage their membership account contact. So when the member log into my APNIC, go to the admin section, they'll see the administration subheading there, and they can update their organization details and also a contact details. And this is the current tool in my APNIC where the member can update their Whois contact which associate with the internet resource. As you can see in that yellow circle here. So this is where this project will focus on. So we basically provide the tools for members that can they can update this information of resource delegated by APNIC to the organization. So this is the first stage of this project. Okay, in the current features in my APNIC, some members experience a little bit of challenge on processing the updating their contacts, especially in Whois related with the Internet Resource Registration Whois database. Especially staff who don't have sufficient knowledge to update the contact, they don't have in-depth technical understanding about a Whois object. Sometimes they got stuck and then ended up not updating their contact. And some people are very busy with other roles, and then got many objects to update at the same time, and again just delay the process, and as the result sometimes they didn't have time to update the contact. And our member service system sometimes receive invalid contact reports of Whois registration that has not been updated for quite a long time. So learning from the feedback and the challenge that members are facing at the moment, so we are designing the new features that basically merge the existing tools of APNIC account contacts and Whois contact that currently located in the separate page. We'll combine in one page, and we will provide the a very clear information in one page, straightforward process, and also the system will send an automatic reminder for the account holder, the authorized contacts, before the account is due to renewal. And in my APNIC, if the member already update the objects or the contacts, they'll see a progress indicator, so they can view and they can so basically we want to give some encouragement to the members to understand that this is the the percentage or the number that contacts that they need to review, to check and update if it's necessary. If you look at the page here, this is the example of the page that we are going to implement. This is still under the initial plan, just very early plan. We might review this format. Depends on the feedback that we will also receive from the member. So this is the section where the member can update their account contacts, and this is the Whois contacts. So you don't have to go to different page to get these tools. And the benefit that we want to deliver to the member is, to address the issue and the challenge that the member had at the moment. So then, for the member, for the contacts that don't have technical knowledge, they don't have to going through, long learning curve. With that, with the tools that we will provide, they can go straight to the each section of Whois contact. context of their account and Whois database. And then we will also provide a prominent message on my APNIC landing page with the update progress, the one that I mentioned earlier. So this is, for example, if they only update 30% of their contacts, so they'll see that they need to catch up, a little bit more. And then they will also be able to compare the percentage of their contacts with other people in their country, other members in the country, and also in the region. So that's also still under the plan. Okay, this is the timeline of the project. By the end of this year, we hope to have the features of updating member accounts and Whois contact ready in my APNIC. So we will definitely welcome for comments, feedback, and constructive suggestion. If you think that we can make it better, easier, simpler, and faster, so you don't have to going around here and there in my APNIC. And by Q1 next year, we hope to get some update features to be implemented as well, and that the contact update progress indicator, the percentage of the contacts update available in the landing page of my APNIC. Okay, I think that's all from me. Happy to take any feedback, comments, or ideas, suggestions.
Any comments, feedback? As I mentioned earlier, this project is part of the 2017 services roadmap that we are working on to help and support members to manage their contacts to improve the data quality and accuracy as well. All right. Thank you, Wita. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite Tom Harrison to give his talk.
Good morning. My name is Tom Harrison. I'm the Software Unit Manager at APNIC, and today I'll be talking about the transition to a single RPKI trust anchor at APNIC. So this will cover the transition process itself, the motivations behind the transition, and the things that RPKI users and relying parties need to update as a result of the transition. This is APNIC's current RPKI state. So we have 5 trust anchors, one for the resources that we've received from IANA, and one for the resources, or one each for the resources that we've received from the other RIRs. Each of these trust anchors in turn issues an online certificate that contains the same set of resources as the trust anchor. And that online certificate is used in an online CA to issue and keep up-to-date member certificates. The first step of the transition involves taking the from IANA trust anchor and declaring it to be the sole trust anchor moving forward. And that in turn involves expanding its resource holdings to cover all resources. So that's v4 0/0 and the equivalents in IPv6 and ASNs. The next step involves having that trust anchor issue a new online certificate called the intermediate certificate that also covers all resources. After that, the intermediate certificate is used to re-sign one of the existing online certificates. Now, the reason this happens is because another option here is for the intermediate certificate to issue and update member certificates directly. But by retaining the online certificates in this model, it allows APNIC to continue enumerating the resources for which we consider ourselves authoritative, and that allows end users to cross-check with other sources of data to make sure that we're not overclaiming. And the other advantage of retaining the online certificates is that the issuer of the member certificates stays the same. So member certificates remain valid even if they're not reissued. So we wait a few days and then we reissue, or rather re-sign, the other online CAs. And then we wait a few months and we withdraw from publication the trust anchors that are no longer used. And this is the state after the transition without the unused trust anchors. So why is this happening? From a cross-RIR perspective, there are two main aims with this transition. The first is to increase consistency with the trust anchor approach across RIRs, and the other is to mitigate some of the risks around invalidity events within APNIC, and those can happen because of inter-RIR transfers and other changes in resource disposition, and also because of interaction, or at least there's a risk of invalidity events out of interactions with the trust anchors. With RIR consistency, each of the other RIRs apart from APNIC currently has one trust anchor, whereas APNIC has 5. The transition, or rather APNIC had one trust anchor a few years ago, but transitioned to having 5 in anticipation of the system developing in certain ways that didn't pan out. So today we have this strange setup where some of the RIRs take one approach and we take another. And when people who might be interested in using APNIC look at this, they go, what's going on? Has this not been settled? Is it not ready for prime time, etc.? So by having a consistent approach across RIRs, that helps to reassure people that they can actually use this. The next part relates to validity of certificates, but before diving into that, it's useful to just recap briefly on how resource certificate validity works. The key thing for the purposes of the transition is that a resource certificate has to have all of its resources covered by its issuing certificate. So in this example, C1 has a 24, it issues a certificate with a 25, and that certificate issues another certificate that has a 25. And each of these are valid, each is covered by its issuer. But if C1 in this diagram reissues C2 to have just a 26, then C3 becomes invalid because its resources are no longer covered by its issuer, and it doesn't become partially invalid, it becomes completely invalid. Now, this behavior, in conjunction with a mistake or a potential mistake made during a transfer, can have really serious consequences. So this example assumes a trust anchor that enumerates the set of resources that a registry is authoritative for, and it also assumes no intermediate, because this is the current state for most of the other RIRs, and it was also APNIC's state before transitioning to 5 trust anchors. So this is the state before the transfer. Everything is fine. Each certificate has a subset of its issuer's resources. But then a transfer happens and something goes wrong and the TA isn't republished. And then the online CA at the second level is overclaiming. And it might be only a very slight overclaim, but it invalidates everything further down the tree, which is obviously a very serious outcome. One way to mitigate this problem is to just change how APNIC certificate validation works, and that's something that RIR staff have been working on at the IETF for some time. So it's a relatively simple change. It just means that a certificate is only valid, or rather is only invalid to the extent of its overclaim. So any resources that it has, that its issuer has, it remains valid for. But this has been a long time, or this has been in process for a long time. It's not yet finalised, and even once it is finalised, it will still take some time for code to be updated and deployed. So if there's some way to mitigate this in the meantime, then that's obviously worth investigating. The way that the transition helps here is that if the trust anchor claims all resources, then it's not possible for the next level down to overclaim. If the next level down can't overclaim, then there's no chance of a mass invalidity event due to overclaiming at that level, which is a good thing. With TA work affecting validity, trust anchors are backed by hardware security modules, which are devices that provide high levels of assurance around key generation, certificate signing, and similar sorts of things. But part of that high level of assurance is that if something goes wrong, they tend to wipe their state irreversibly. That, obviously enough, has catastrophic consequences for a PKI. So the more TA work that is happening, the greater the risk that's involved here. With the transition, the trust anchor covers all resources, and that means that it doesn't change when resource disposition changes, so when a transfer happens or something like that. That leaves a handful of events that still require TA work, but they're in the nature of things that can be scheduled and planned for in advance and accounted for in that way, as opposed to, say, a transfer where there might be some urgency around reissuance and publication so that somebody can create Whois, for example. So, what do you need to do? If you only issue Whois, then no change is required out of the transition, and your existing Whois remain valid before, during, and after the transition. If you run relying party software, however, removing the trust anchors that will become unused is a good idea. It isn't strictly required. Validation outcomes will remain the same regardless, but if they're not removed, then you will eventually see warnings like can't access certificate, that sort of thing. But yeah, just to be clear, they don't affect validation outcomes. We had planned for this work to be completed by the end of September, but part of the process was performing the transition in our public RPKI testbed, and we ran into some problems at that point that we hadn't caught during earlier testing. So we're currently working through reverting that and starting again, and we'll make an announcement as to the updated timeline once we've confirmed further on that. Thanks. Thanks. Does anybody have any questions?
Any question for Tom Harrison?
Thank you.
Thanks. There's a question from the floor.
I have a couple questions for the RPKI stuff. The first of all is, what is the current schedule, and you will require the APNIC member to implement the RPKI? This is the first questions. Second of all, I think for some of the APNIC member or the ISP or for some of the economy or country, they still like to understand what is benefit to implement the RPKI. Or I know the APNIC, we talk about that so many times. But to be honest, there's still many people doesn't really understand it. I think maybe we have to ask the NIR, do their job to tell their government or the society to understand what is RPKI implementation, the purpose of that. The last question is the issue is just like a DNSEC. when the different version of RPK are going to implement it, how can make the version, upgrade is much smoother and much easier. Thanks.
APNIC doesn't require, for the first question, APNIC doesn't require members to implement RPKI or issue ROAs or anything like that. It's completely discretionary on the members' part. For the second part, as far as advantages of using RPKI is concerned, the only real alternative is creating route objects in the IIR, in Whois. Using ROAs means that people get a cryptographically verified assertion that somebody has said that this is okay. For example, in the won't go there. There are issues around things like RADB, for example, because it doesn't have any authentication on it. But a lot of people use it to do route filtering and things like that. So if somebody's using RPKI, the levels of assurance around somebody having actually said, yes, this is okay, are much greater. But I will have to ask for your third question again.
Okay, and the third question is, eventually the RPKI, if you have a version upgrade, and is it possible to make it easier and simpler? Because like a DNSEC, the version upgrade, I still thinking about a little bit, complicated from the people implemented.
Hi, George Michelson. I hope you don't mind if I step in, but because I have been involved in the standardisation effort slightly longer than Tom, it might be easier for me to respond. When you stipulate how things are validated in PKI, you use an attribute that is encoded into the certificate. It's an object identifier, an OID. And the binding between what the certificate means and how it should be validated and the OID is very strong. Now, we have a problem here that there is only one OID in the certificate. So if you change the OID, you have radically changed the validation path for consuming that certificate. And it has this quality that is best said as, it's a flag day. And I think you would know from your experience and from involvement in the DNSSEC phases in ICANN, flag days are awful. They're awful. So it is a real problem. And I don't know what the natural outcome is going to be. Probably it would be a communication with relying party software owners to make them construct software which recognise both OID and can perform validation. And it may be that we would have to fork keys inside our infrastructure and reuse private keys in two parallel systems and produce two outcomes for some period of time to try to avoid a flag day. But yes, it's a problem. Okay. It is a problem. And many things in the architecture of RPKI are having to catch up with changes in the real world. For instance, there's a standardization effort called TAMP, Trust Anchor Management Protocol, which is a basis for saying, I'm moving my trust anchor. And if we'd been aware of that at the right time in RPKI, we could have made improvements. It just wasn't there at the time.
Can I give further to talk about that? As you mentioned about, and also I asking about the DNSSEC implementation in the past. Many operators, they hesitate to implement the DNSSEC is because of the cost. In the very first version, the cost actually is dramatically. That means you need to buy a much powerful machine to operate it. And what do you expect? If the people implement the RPK, how much cost that they need to prepare to make this operation, or it's totally different with DNSSEC?
No, there is some similarity. If you consider RPSec as the general problem, there are two parts to that problem. One is protection of origination, which is the framework that we are primarily engaged in now, and the other is protection of the path. The origination problem is really quite cheap as far as a router is concerned, because generally it's calculated outside the router and you maintain a bubble of trust external to the router and you refer to it. But path is absolutely innate to the BGP experience. As you perform operations in BGP, you acquire knowledge of the cryptographic statements about your paths, and that is high cost.
Okay.
And that is a potential problem, but that's a problem for another space, if you understand me. I would say, in general, that RPKI is a valuable thing, irrespective of the routing component. Tom actually alluded to this very well when he talked about that qualitative difference between RPSL and the ROA. The ROA is a checkable, cryptographically signed assertion of your desire.
Okay.
And it's quite strong, and it doesn't have a cost consequence in routing. It's something that anyone can check that actually puts immense trust back in the declaration of intent.
Thank you, because I think I just try to make a dialogue between us so some of the people really understand what the sequence they
it's
need
adding
to
complexity,
prepare for
and
that.
it does have to be thought about.
Yeah.
I would also like to say that we have been engaged with the NIR in an ongoing conversation for a number of years now. The last meeting in Vietnam, we met with TWNIC, CNNIC and JPNIC.
Okay.
We've already met with JPNIC at this session, and we will be meeting with CNNIC, and they are making fantastic progress in making the investment that is necessary for a build-out. So that dialogue is happening.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Whois, for the question. Oh, there's one of Taiji.
Hi, my name is Taiji from JPNIC. I have two comments on this presentation. One is that the changing the trust anchor, it have long discussions, in my understand, and you include APNIC had a great effort to make the simple structure and avoiding the risks when we do the resource transfer between RIR. The second is that in Japanese community, especially for routing, people understand the benefit of RPKI, and they are trying to think about how to find the incidents or how to avoid the incidents. But the difficulty of the understand of the benefit is that we need to start to use, for example, making ROA to understand the benefit itself. If after the making ROA, it's like a route object in RIR, we can find the incident in the routing system. So maybe the cost of the deployment of the RPKI, it's more communication cost comparing with technical cost, I think. So as a JPNIC, we are trying to make the chances or the conferences, they can exchange their knowledge or exchange their operations in daily life. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the comments. I'm aware of the timing, so I would ask GGM to come up, George Michelson to come to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I have an informational presentation. It's a problem statement. So it's not a policy discussion, and it's not directly a conversation about services that are taking place just in APNIC. It's really just to try and stimulate some thinking about the nature of management of address resources and routing globally, and flagging some issues that have been emerging over quite a long period of time. There's been a conversation taking place informally on a number of different mailing lists, and there has also been an increase in problem requests coming into Help Desk and Hostmaster at APNIC relating to this problem space. And it's motivated us to think that we would like to re-engage with you as a community, understand where we want to go with global routing management and asset management in internet number resources, and take some steps forward. So if you're involved in the process of managing and being a custodian for addresses, if you care about the integrity of routing, this is something we think that you might like to be engaged in. So the summary of this problem statement is that the process of managing routing, the practices, has essentially become fragmented. It's both fragmented within the frameworks that people are using and also across different frameworks. There is a critical role for us as the RIR system because we are the foundation of the binding of a given identity in the management of a given resource. We provide that central glue because we are the ones who make the determination who has the asset at the point of issuing out resources. And we need to improve on this because as a result of changes in the topography of addresses, as we have more and more fragmentation of address, and also the consequences of final address handout that has divorced AS holdings from address holdings, we actually have a magnified problem. But we feel like this is actually a community problem. We have to have a conversation with everyone globally involved in address management to resolve this problem. To summarize, there is a sort of overlap between RPSL and RPKI that is taking place globally. This table shows for each of the technologies in both V4 and V6 the amount of global BGP that is covered in that framework, and then in brackets I've included the regional component that relates to us as APNIC. So internationally, about 75% of all of the routable addresses in IPv4 are covered in some kind of a routing registry in RPSL. We're actually doing better in the Asia-Pacific region. About 81% of all the addresses in our region lie either in an APNIC routing registry or JPNIC's routing registry, or possibly in some other location, but they are actually covered in RPSL. In V6, things are actually quite different. Internationally, nearly 90% of addresses are covered in routing registry, but somehow only about 65% of them in the APNIC region are actually correctly tagged. So the second column shows how many of these addresses which are in a framework like RPSL are also in a framework like RPKI. So we can see that again, internationally, somewhere around 93% of IPv4 that is in RPSL is also in some kind of an RPKI framework. And again, in the APNIC region, we have a slightly improved coverage there. But if you come down the table and you think about RPKI as a mechanism distinct from RPSL, the story is really nothing like as good. The deployment of RPKI is really at quite low numbers, and in our region, it's significantly lower than in the rest of the world. And this is a problem we have to attack. We have to engage with you, and we have to understand what we can do to improve participation in RPKI. But there is this second problem, which is that resources are now being marked for their routing integrity in multiple frameworks. And if you look at the distribution of these numbers, you will see that there is a lack of symmetry between how numbers are being talked about when we discuss their routing integrity. So to consider overlap slightly differently, this is a chart of whether a resource is in more than one IRR, Internet Routing Registry. And for APNIC, overwhelmingly, our resources are only in our own registry, but the one exception is that a significant number, 66% of our resources, are also covered in the RADB routing database at Merit. If we consider IRNN, the Indian community have actually made a very strong commitment to routing practice, but they still maintain quite a large number of resources in the APNIC Whois registry. And we probably need to have a conversation about where the appropriate place is to manage those resources. But overall, they're doing very well. JPNIC have the same problem APNIC have. The assets that are managed inside JPIRR are remanaged inside the Merit RADB system. And we then have this problem that RIPE are also visible in RADB, but at a lower intensity. So the variant level of overlaps, the low ones, they're actually really good. That says there's one place in this framework you can go to get the absolute statement of routing integrity. But the overlap says, hang on a moment, where do I actually go to look for this? Where do I go to understand where routing is taking place and how to validate what I see in the global network? And this problem is actually getting worse over time because we now have two forms of technology, and we also have the problem that we have more participants in global routing. As a result of address rundown, more AS holders are saying to customers, I can't give you addresses, I need you to go and apply for addresses in your own name, which then means there's a disconnection between the AS holder and the address holder that has to be represented somehow in the routing statement. So within RPSL, there really are two primary sources of routing truth. There is the RIPE Whois database, which is a huge international repository of routing information, and there is RADB. And it basically is the classic disconnection between Europe and the rest of the world. But it raises the question, what if these two sources don't agree about a routing statement? Which one's right? How do we know where the integrity lies when they disagree? So there are then a second rank of sources like APNIC and APNIC and JPNIC, which are much less global in their context. And we have the same problem emerging. Content is now visible in multiple places. And then we have ISP-specific routing registries, many of which are copied at Merit and available for global view. JPIRR, by the way, is actually very interesting because they have a strong requirement for an annual recommitment. You cannot leave routing statements in that registry without recommitting to them, which means the level of accuracy in their routing assertions is really very high. And this is partly because the Japanese routing community make very strong use of IRR-mediated peering statements to do with community strings and elements of connectivity that are managed quite closely. And so their routing practice as a community is very tightly bound up in the integrity of their own IRR. But we do have this problem, a lack of cohesion. So the trust model lies at the core of this problem. Trust in RPSL is essentially just a simple assertion. It stems from a belief in the integrity of the publisher. If you believe the publisher, you believe what records you see there. RADB doesn't have a strong linkage back to our process of allocation. So if JPNIC hand out a resource to a company in Japan, that company can go to RADB, pay a membership and register a root object, but there's no formalism around the verification of the relationship of that company and that address. RIPE, for reasons to do with the convenience of European routing practice, RIPE have this policy of allowing foreign objects, that's objects which are not part of RIPE's own asset management framework, to be included using a well-known maintainer, which means that there are now two classes of information in the RIPE routing registry. There are the assertions about resources that vest with RIPE, and they have very, very high integrity, and there are the assertions that are made on behalf of any other resource, and they are essentially fiat declarations. They don't have quite the same binding quality because they are simply placed there under an open maintainer. Now, RPKI is a completely different model. RPKI is a cryptographically secured assertion, and it vests extremely closely with the act of giving a resource, giving custodianship of a resource to an entity through the cryptographic framework. It's a strong binding, it's testable. But there is a second quality. The root origin attestation, the ROA, has an optional field called max length, which associates a prefix length in BGP as a variable number. But also, it does not require the consent of the origin AS. In RPSL, a root object actually requires the consent of the AS to be bound into this relationship of origin AS and prefix. So we have a different trust model for the assertion of an origin AS in RPKI. Cryptography is good, but this assertion doesn't require the consent of an AS holder, whereas in RPSL, it does. Now, reflecting on that difference that JPIRR have of a recommitment to the integrity of routing, all objects in RPKI must be recommitted to. They have a lifetime. So the problem of the age of an object, is it stale or is it current? That isn't such a big problem in this framework. So where we get to is these two technologies are not the same. They're not saying the same things. Because of the max length, there is the possibility of automatically making route objects, but now you have to make thousands of them to represent the same information. And we don't have consent of the AS holder to engage in what we're doing. And this kind of means that the landscape is a little fluid at the moment. Now, RIPE have actually been in a conversation for a number of years between the routing working group and the database working group around the nature of the foreign objects. This has been under the stewardship of their working group chairs, and it's a very good conversation. And there's now a sense that data is moving from the RIPE RPSL framework back into regional registries where those resources vest. But we haven't been very engaged as APNIC community in that conversation. We've been quite passive as RIPE have been looking at this problem and thinking about how to resolve it. And we have an automatic root object creation happening in RPKI as a result of things like Ready to Roa and other initiatives, which means we're changing the number of route objects that potentially are appearing as a result of trying to bridge the gap between the two systems. So it puts questions on the table. What would it mean if these two systems don't agree? Where do we decide where truth lies when we have two frameworks for saying basically the same thing? And George Quo and the hostmasters and the help desk at APNIC actually are now confronting and mediating this on a day-to-day level as a problem. They are getting requests where people say, my resource is appearing in a routing statement in Merit or as part of a routing foreign object in RIPE, but I didn't authorize it. Can you help me deal with this? Or the other side of the deal. I have addresses and I need to bind them to the origin AS, but I don't have the AS, and I can't get the AS holder to engage and talk to me about making this object. So we have an increased workload in our service department dealing with a community problem. We also have community activists who are looking at routing integrity and who are saying, this is crazy. You have a Chinese address block that is now being routed in Eastern Europe. You have a Jamaican ISP that is sending spam using resources from Africa. Where is the conversation? Why aren't you guys on top of this? And it is very difficult for us to answer because we don't have a cohesive conversation about address management and routing integrity that we can carry forward. So my goal here is to try to stimulate a sense we need to talk. We need to talk about this problem, and we need to be aware that the conversation is happening in a number of locations. It's happening on NOG mailing lists. It's happening on working groups in the RIPE region and in the IETF. It's happening at our help desk, and we have a key role. We collectively are the origination of identity and authority over internet number resources. So we should be part of this, and we should include thinking about RPKI as evidence of control of an asset. And we have to talk about what processes we could bring to the table, the discussion frameworks, venues, basis to come to some consensus about what we're doing. That's really valuable stuff that we could add. So in the background, there have been a number of ideas that have come up. we've had the idea of asking people who have complex multiple internet registries to respect us as a source of authority and engage with us in some kind of database linkage. And the primary problem there is something computer scientists call the CAP theorem. You can't have integrity over your data if you depend on an external information provider to run your database. I've been in a conversation with Wilfried Werber from the RIPE region, and he is very, very concerned about the architectural effects on RIPE Whois if they made this change. But nonetheless, we could talk about this. Google have a model that many of us may have seen, where if you want to do things in Google, the first thing they say is, here's a cryptographic hash, put it on your web page, put it in your DNS. If I see that in the next hour, that proves that you are in control of this asset. And Google have actually come to us and said, we are considering using the remark field inside Whois objects, and we are considering telling people, put a remarks object with this cryptographic hash in your Whois, and if we see it, we will then believe you have control of the asset. So proof of possession mechanisms people are now talking about. There are ways we could use RPKI to do that. The automatic creation of root objects, that is actually making a burden for the people who run IRR. If you make a max length statement in a V6 root, it has the potential to make 60, 70, 120,000 root objects, which massively increases the cost of constructing validated roots. And we actually think it might be time to talk about revision of RPSL to include the max length field as an attribute in that schema. People have talked about the IRR toolsets. There is a very, very nice idea that originates in the RIPE NCC, which is signed RPSL. This is a standard that was promoted by Rob Kistelecki and others, and we think it might be worth discussing whether RPKI signatures could be used in this framework. So, in summary, we need to come back together as a community and talk about this. And George Quo suggested that the right way to do this was not to do it here in a APNIC meeting, not in the service context, but to go into Apricot, into APOPs, into the wider community and have a conversation there. So in effect, this is a bootstrap saying, why don't you guys think about joining us in a conversation with operators at the logical meeting? And if we do that, what kind of role would you like us to have? We know that we're going to continue to offer the RPSL service, the IRR. We know that we will be doing RPKI because that is a part of our custodian obligations. But we'd love to know what other options you would like to explore. Would you like to tell us things you'd like to see done here? What do you think? Could we take this to a list? That's my talk.
Thank you very much, George. Any question? Comments?
fewer people comparing other regions, and the GPRR are used for the Japanese ACE operators mainly. So the problem could be problem or difficulty is different from the global scale and the one domestic scale, I think.
Okay, I'm aware that we are running over time, but we do like to continue the conversation with you all on various different presentation topics that we have given today. With that in mind, I like to say that we're happy to have your feedback, so please talk to us while you're here. Anyone who's watching the live cast or the video later on, get in touch with us by sending your feedback to feedback@apnic.net. Let us know how we're doing and any interesting topic that you like to hear in the future, so that we can work on it to prepare the next session. Can I invite all the speakers again to stand up and show your face so we know they can all speak to you while they have during the coffee break to discuss the subject they are interested in. And thank you, everyone. Oh, the camera guy has asked us to have a group photo, so if you would like to come up.